What happens when a beloved music legend sits down for what should be a friendly morning chat only to face an interviewer determined to destroy his reputation on live television in just 37 seconds? One shocking comment would turn a routine interview into the most explosive moment in daytime TV history, leaving viewers stunned and one host facing the biggest backlash of her career. The morning started like any other at the ITV studios. Cliff Richard, the legendary singer with over 60 years in the music business, had arrived early for his scheduled appearance on Lorraine. He was there to promote his new album, a collection of classic covers that showcased his enduring voice. At 78 years old, Cliff remained one of Britain's most cherished entertainers. Known not just for his music, but for his genuine warmth and professionalism. Behind the scenes, Cliff was his usual charming self, chatting with crew members and makeup artists who had worked with him countless times before. Everyone loved working with Cliff Richard. He remembered names, asked about families, and never acted like the superstar he truly was. The production team was looking forward to what they expected would be a delightful, uplifting segment to brighten viewers' mornings. Lorraine Kelly, however, seemed different that morning. Several crew members noticed her sharp tone during rehearsals, her impatience with the technical team, and an unusual edge in her voice. Perhaps she was having a bad morning, or maybe the pressure of maintaining her position in the competitive world of daytime television was getting to her. Whatever the reason, there was a tension in the air that made everyone uncomfortable. As the cameras prepared to roll, Cliff sat in the guest chair, relaxed and ready to share stories about his career and new music. He had done thousands of interviews over the decades, from small radio stations to major international broadcasts. This was supposed to be easy, a friendly chat with someone he had known professionally for years. Lorraine took her position across from him, shuffling through her notes with an intensity that seemed unnecessary for such a straightforward interview. The floor manager began the countdown and within moments, they were live to millions of viewers across the country. Good morning and welcome back to the show. I'm joined now by music legend Cliff Richard, who has a brand new album out. Lorraine's opening was standard, professional, exactly what viewers expected. Cliff smiled warmly, ready to discuss his passion for music. Thank you for having me, Lorraine. It's always a pleasure to be here, Cliff replied, his voice carrying that familiar warmth that had endeared him to generations of fans. Now, Cliff, this new album of yours. It's all covers, isn't it? Not exactly pushing any boundaries, are we? The first hint of something sharp in Lorraine's tone caught Cliff slightly off guard, but he maintained his composure. Well, I think there's real artistry and interpretation, Lorraine. These are songs that have meant something to people for decades, and I wanted to bring my own perspective to them. Sometimes the most beautiful thing you can do is honor something classic. Lorraine leaned back in her chair, a slight smirk crossing her face. Right. But some might say it's a bit safe, isn't it? Playing it safe when perhaps you should be taking risks at this stage of your career. The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Cliff's smile remained, but those watching closely could see a flicker of confusion in his eyes. This wasn't the tone he had expected from a morning chat show. I've never been one to shy away from risks. Lorraine, I've experimented with different styles throughout my career. From rock and roll to gospel, pop to musical theater. This album is about celebrating the songs that have shaped music history. But surely, Cliff, at your age, wouldn't it be more honest to admit that you're just playing the nostalgia card, cashing in on people's memories rather than creating something new? The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the warm, welcoming atmosphere they had expected from a Lorraine Kelly interview. Cliff's professionalism remained intact, but his voice carried a slight edge when he responded, I think music is timeless, Lorraine. Whether I'm 78 or 28, good music speaks to people. I'm not cashing in on anything. I'm sharing music I love with people who appreciate it. Lorraine's eyes narrowed slightly. She glanced down at her notes, then back up at Cliff with an expression that seemed almost predatory. Speaking of your age, Cliff, don't you think it's time to perhaps step aside and let younger artists have the spotlight? Surely you've had your time. The question hit like a slap. The studio audience fell completely silent. Even the camera operator seemed shocked by the directness and rudeness of the comment. Cliff Richard, a man who had always conducted himself with grace and dignity, sat frozen for a moment, clearly struggling to process what he had just heard. I beg your pardon. Cliff's voice was quiet, controlled, but there was steel beneath it now. Well, you've been in the business for what, 60 years? Surely, that's enough for one person. Wouldn't it be more graceful to bow out and give someone else a chance? The temperature in the studio seemed to drop 10 degrees. Cliff Richard straightened in his chair, his legendary composure beginning to crack under the weight of such an unprofessional and personally insulting line of questioning. Lorraine, I came here today to talk about music, to share something positive with your viewers. I'm not sure why you feel the need to attack me personally, but this isn't what I signed up for. But Lorraine wasn't finished. If anything, Cliff's obvious discomfort seemed to embolden her. She leaned forward, her voice taking on an even sharper edge. Oh, come now, Cliff, surely you can handle a few honest questions. Or has success made you too sensitive for real journalism? The insult landed with devastating effect. Cliff Richard, a man who had faced down decades of both praise and criticism, who had handled everything from teenage screaming fans to serious music critics, found himself under attack from someone who was supposed to be interviewing him about his art. Real journalism. Cliff's voice rose slightly. The first crack in his legendary calm. This isn't journalism, Lorraine. This is you being deliberately cruel for no reason I can understand. The studio audience began to murmur, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a respected elder statesman of British music being humiliated on live television by someone who seemed to be enjoying every moment of his discomfort. Lorraine smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach her eyes. Getting a bit worked up, aren't we, Cliff? Maybe that's the problem with your generation. You can't handle honest conversation anymore. The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. Now, what had started as a routine morning interview had transformed into something ugly, something that made everyone in the studio feel deeply uncomfortable. The camera operators exchanged worried glances. The floor manager looked toward the control room, clearly wondering if someone should intervene. Cliff Richard took a deep breath, clearly trying to regain his composure. For a moment, it seemed like his decades of professionalism might win out, that he might find a way to salvage this disaster of an interview. Lorraine, I've been doing interviews since before you were born. I've handled difficult questions, challenging topics, and yes, even hostile interviewers. But what you're doing right now isn't interviewing. It's just being mean-spirited. Mean-spirited? Lorraine laughed. But there was no humor in it. I'm asking the questions that everyone else is too polite to ask. Maybe that makes me the only honest person in this room. Honest about what exactly? Cliff's voice was getting stronger now. His legendary politeness finally beginning to crack under the sustained assault. What exactly are you being honest about? That you think I should disappear because I'm old? That you think my music doesn't matter anymore? What's your point here, Lorraine? The studio audience was completely silent now. This wasn't the feel-good morning television they had come to see. This was watching a man's dignity being attacked for sport, and everyone could feel how wrong it was. Lorraine shifted in her chair, and for a split second, something flickered across her face. Maybe a moment of doubt, a recognition that she had gone too far, but instead of pulling back, she doubled down. My point, Cliff, is that maybe it's time for some honesty in this business. Maybe it's time to stop pretending that hanging on forever is somehow admirable. Maybe it's time to admit that there comes a point when graceful retirement is better than desperate attempts to stay relevant. The words hit like physical blows. Cliff Richard, who had spent his entire career being nothing but gracious and professional, who had never badmouthed another performer or created scandal, sat in stunned silence for several seconds. Desperate attempts. His voice was barely above a whisper, but the microphones caught every word. Is that what you think this is? Desperation? Well, what would you call it? You're nearly 80 years old, Cliff. Don't you think it's a bit sad still trying to compete with artists a third of your age? The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Here was a woman attacking someone, not for anything he had done wrong, not for any scandal or controversy, but simply for having the audacity to continue doing what he loved at an advanced age. Cliff Richard stood up slowly from his chair. The movement was deliberate, controlled, but everyone in the studio could see that something fundamental had shifted. I think we're done here, Lorraine. His voice was quiet, but carried absolute authority. This wasn't the confused, hurt man who had been sitting there moments before. This was someone who had found his limit and wasn't going to tolerate being pushed past it. Oh, running away now, are we? Lorraine's voice had a mocking edge that made several audience members visibly ooze. Can't handle a real conversation. Cliff turned to face her directly, and his eyes were blazing now. Real conversation? You call this real conversation, Lorraine? I've had real conversations with journalists all over the world. I've discussed my music, My faith, my life, my mistakes, my successes. That's real conversation. What you're doing is just playground bullying with cameras rolling. Bullying. Lorraine's voice rose in mock surprise. I'm asking legitimate questions about your career choices. No, you're not. Cliff's voice was getting stronger with each word. You haven't asked me a single legitimate question about my music, my career choices, or anything else that matters. You've just been insulting me from the moment this interview started, and I have no idea why. The control room was in chaos. Producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial, continue rolling, or somehow salvage what had become a complete disaster. But the confrontation was so compelling, so raw and real that nobody wanted to look away. Lorraine seemed to realize she was losing control of the situation. Her confident smirk was wavering, and for the first time since the interview began, she looked uncertain. I think you're being overly sensitive, Cliff. These are just normal interview questions. Normal. Cliff's voice cracked with disbelief. Normal questions. You ask me if I should step aside because of my age. You called my work desperate attempts to stay relevant. You suggested I was too old to make music. In what world are those normal questions? The audience was starting to shift in their seats. Some were nodding in agreement with Cliff. Others looked embarrassed to be witnessing such an uncomfortable scene, but everyone was riveted. Lorraine tried to regain her footing. Well, perhaps I could have phrased things differently, but the underlying questions are valid. Valid? Cliff was fully engaged now. His famous composure completely gone. Valid according to who made you the judge of when someone should stop doing what they love? Who gave you the right to tell me or anyone else that we're too old to create, too old to share our gifts with the world? I'm just reflecting what a lot of people think. Cliff, are you? And what people would those be? Because in my experience, the people who love music, who really understand what it means to create and to share that creation with others, those people don't think there's an expiration date on artistry. The challenge hung in the air between them. Lorraine's face was flushed now. Her carefully maintained television persona cracking under the pressure of Cliff's righteous anger. She had clearly expected him to take her abuse quietly, to perhaps make a few weak protests before slinking away defeated. Instead, she was facing a man who had found his voice and wasn't afraid to use it. Look, Cliff, I think you're taking this all far too personally, Lorraine said, her voice now carrying a slight tremor. This is just television. This is just how interviews work nowadays. No, Lorraine. This is not how interviews work. This is how bullies work. Cliff's voice was steady now, controlled, but filled with decades of accumulated wisdom and dignity. I've been doing television since you were a child. I know what a real interview looks like, and this isn't it? The studio audience was completely captivated. Some were openly nodding in approval at Cliff's words. Others looked shocked at witnessing such a public dressing down of a beloved television host, but everyone understood they were seeing something unprecedented. Lorraine tried to laugh it off, but the sound was forced and uncomfortable. Oh, come on now. Don't be so dramatic. We're just having a chat. A chat. Cliff's eyebrows rose in disbelief. You call telling someone they should retire because they're old having a chat? You call suggesting that my life's work is desperate and pathetic having a chat? Lorraine, I don't know what's happened to you or why you thought this was acceptable, but this stops now. The power in the room had completely shifted where Lorraine had started the interview in control, smugly attacking her guest. She was now clearly on the defensive. Her usual confident demeanor had evaporated, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. I was just trying to ask challenging questions, she said weakly. No, you weren't. Challenging questions would be about my music, about my creative process, about the choices I make as an artist. You weren't challenging anything except my right to exist in this industry, and that's not journalism, Lorraine. That's just cruelty. The floor manager was making frantic gestures from the side of the set, clearly wanting to cut to commercial, but the confrontation was so intense that breaking away seemed impossible. This was live television at its most raw and unpredictable. Lorraine made one last desperate attempt to regain control. Well, I think our viewers deserve honest discussions about the entertainment industry. Honest discussions. Cliff's voice rose with genuine incredulity. Then let's have an honest discussion, Lorraine. Let's talk honestly about what just happened here. You invited me on your show supposedly to discuss my new album. Instead, you used your platform to attack me personally, to suggest I'm too old to make music and to imply that my continued career is somehow embarrassing or desperate. That's not honest discussion. That's character assassination. The words hit their mark. Lorraine visibly flinched, and for the first time since the interview began, she looked genuinely upset rather than smugly confident. I never said any of those things, she protested weakly. You said I should step aside because of my age. You said I was cashing in on nostalgia. You called my work desperate attempts to stay relevant. You asked if it wasn't time for graceful retirement. Those were your exact words, Lorraine, and there are millions of people who just heard you say them. The studio was dead silent except for Cliff's voice. Even the camera operators had stopped moving. Everyone was transfixed by this extraordinary public confrontation. And you know what the saddest part is, Cliff continued, his voice now carrying a note of genuine sadness. I thought we were friends. I thought you respected what I've tried to do with my life and my career. I never imagined you saw me as someone who should just disappear because I've reached a certain age. Lorraine's composure finally cracked completely. Cliff won. That wasn't what I meant. Then what did you mean, Lorraine? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounded exactly like you think I should stop making music because I'm old. It sounded exactly like you think my fans are fools for still enjoying what I do. It sounded exactly like you have nothing but contempt for me and everything I represent. That's not true, Lorraine said, but her voice was barely audible now. Then why did you say it? Why did you spend the last 10 minutes attacking me for having the audacity to still love music at 78? Why did you make me feel like I should be ashamed of who I am and what I do? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Lorraine opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time in her television career, she was completely speechless. Cliff Richard straightened his jacket and looked directly into the camera. To anyone watching who might be wondering if they're too old to pursue their dreams, if they're too old to share their talents with the world, let me tell you something. Age is just a number. Passion doesn't have an expiration date. And never let anyone tell you that you should stop doing what you love just because you've been doing it for a long time. He turned back to Lorraine, who was still sitting in stunned silence. Thank you for the reminder of why I love making music, Lorraine. It's because music brings joy to people's lives. It connects us across generations. It reminds us of our shared humanity. Those are values worth defending regardless of how old you are. With that, Cliff Richard walked off the set, leaving Lorraine Kelly sitting alone in front of millions of viewers. Her career forever changed by 37 seconds of cruelty that backfired spectacularly.